On July 26, 1948, Elsa Ehrich, a woman once feared by thousands, was led to the gallows. Her face was expressionless, but her legacy was soaked in cruelty. Elsa Ehrich, a seemingly ordinary young woman, had become a symbol of sadistic cruelty inside the barbed wire hell of Majdanek concentration camp. She wasn't alone. Alongside her were other female guards, smiling, uniformed monsters who beat, tortured, and murdered prisoners with cold efficiency. Their victims were women, children, the elderly, anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. When the war ended and the world cried out for justice, only one woman, Ehrich, was executed, while the rest walked free despite their brutality. In this video, we'll expose the horrifying truth behind the female guards of Majdanek, their crimes, their trials, and the rare, brutal executions that followed. This is not just history, it's a reckoning. Majdanek was not just a concentration camp. It was a fully functioning death factory located near Lublin, Poland, operational from 1941 to 1944. It held around 150,000 prisoners, with at least 78,000 murdered, most of them Jews. Unlike Auschwitz, Majdanek was not hidden deep in the woods. Locals could see the crematorium smoke, smell the burning flesh. What made Majdanek particularly unique, however, was its use of female guards, known as Aufseherinnen. Women were recruited into the SS system, with promises of good pay, prestige, and relative comfort. Many came willingly. Their job was to oversee female prisoners, maintain discipline, and often carry out selections for the gas chambers. But discipline in Majdanek meant something terrifying. These women carried whips, kicked prisoners to death, and sometimes forced inmates into deadly games for their own amusement. They weren't passive bystanders. They were active participants in genocide. The camp's hierarchy allowed these women significant autonomy. While male officers gave orders, female guards often decided how much brutality to unleash. Some competed to be the most feared. Their targets were often fellow women, pregnant mothers, teenage girls, elderly grandmothers. None were spared. Majdanek's liberation by Soviet forces in 1944 revealed a chilling landscape of open gas chambers, mounds of shoes, and skeletal remains. Among the captured staff were several of these female guards. The world was about to learn just how deep their cruelty ran. Among the dozens of female guards who served at Majdanek, a few names stand out, etched into history for the sheer depravity of their actions. Elsa Ehrich was one of the most feared. Young and seemingly mild-mannered, she quickly earned a reputation for violence. Survivors described how she beat women until their bones broke, dragged prisoners by their hair, and showed delight during selections for the gas chambers. Her cruelty wasn't random. It was methodical. She rose through the ranks to become deputy commandant, overseeing the terror inflicted on thousands. Ehrich was later tried and executed in 1948, the only female Majdanek guard to suffer this fate. Hildegard Lechert, known to prisoners as Bloody Brigitte, had a similar profile. She whipped inmates mercilessly and took part in executions. Her brutality extended beyond Majdanek. She later served at Ravensbrück and Auschwitz. After the war, she was captured and sentenced to prison, but not death. She lived into the 1990s. Hermann Braunsteiner, later dubbed the Stomping Mare, was infamous for kicking children to death. Though she was stationed at Majdanek, she escaped justice for years, even emigrating to the US. Her past caught up with her in the 1970s when she was extradited and imprisoned, but again, not executed. Alice Orlowski and Hermine Butcher-Bruckner were also known for their viciousness, abusing pregnant women, shooting prisoners at close range, and driving others to suicide. What unites these women is not just their cruelty, but how many managed to escape the gallows. Despite overwhelming evidence of sadism, only one, Ehrich, was ultimately hanged. The question lingers, How could such horror go so lightly punished? In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the world demanded justice. What followed were the Majdanek trials, a series of war crimes prosecutions that spanned decades and exposed the machinery of Nazi genocide, including the role of female guards. The first Majdanek trial took place in Lublin, Poland, in 1944. While the war was still raging, it was one of the earliest Nazi war crimes trials. Several former camp personnel were sentenced, but only a handful of guards had been captured. The spotlight would intensify later. The second trial, 1946 to 1948, also in Poland, was larger and more comprehensive. It included Elsa Ehrich, whose crimes were so egregious that even in a time of exhausted moral outrage, the court sentenced her to death. She was hanged in 1948, but most female guards weren't tried until years later, some not until the 1970s, during the third Majdanek trial in Düsseldorf, West Germany, 1975 to 1981. This trial lasted nearly 6 years and became the longest Nazi war crimes trial in history. Survivors testified about horrific abuse at the hands of women like Hildegard Lechert and Hermine Braunsteiner. Yet, despite the testimonies, the sentences were shockingly light. Many received only a few years in prison. Some were acquitted entirely. The world, it seemed, had grown weary of looking backward. While these trials did reveal the shocking behavior of female SS guards, they failed to bring the same level of punishment seen in other war crimes prosecutions. For most of these women, justice remained elusive or incomplete. Despite the scale of their atrocities, only one female guard from Majdanek was executed, Elsa Ehrich. Her death stands in stark contrast to the leniency many of her colleagues received, raising uncomfortable questions about justice, gender, and accountability. Ehrich's crimes were well documented. Survivor testimonies described her as methodical, vicious, and deeply involved in selections for the gas chambers. She was not simply following orders, she was enforcing them with brutal enthusiasm. In the second Majdanek trial, 1946 to 1948, her guilt was undeniable. The court sentenced her to death for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. On July 26, 1948, in Lublin, Poland, Ehrich was hanged. She was 29 years old. Reports describe her walking to the gallows without emotion, her final expression as cold as her actions in the camp. Her execution was swift. It was also symbolic, a rare moment when a female perpetrator was held fully accountable. But why was Ehrich the only one? The answer is complex. Post-war legal systems were inconsistent. Many female guards, like Lechert and Braunsteiner, were initially overlooked or fled to other countries. Some trials lacked evidence. Others suffered from shifting political priorities. Gender also played a role. Women were often viewed as incapable of such evil, a bias that influenced courtrooms and public opinion. Moreover, by the time of the third Majdanek trial, decades had passed. Sympathy, political fatigue, and the challenges of prosecution meant even the worst offenders received light sentences. In the end, Ehrich's hanging was not just a punishment, it was an exception. A moment when the rope answered 1,000 screams, while most others faded into silence. The story of the female guards at Majdanek forces us to confront an unsettling truth. Evil knows no gender. For decades, the image of the Nazi war criminal was almost exclusively male. Himmler, Eichmann, Mengele. But in the shadows of that narrative stood women like Ehrich, Lechert, and Braunsteiner, smiling, brutal, and largely forgotten by history. Why did so many of them escape execution? Gender bias played a key role. Courts and societies often struggled to reconcile the idea of women, traditionally seen as caregivers, as perpetrators of violence. This psychological blind spot led to lighter sentences, delayed arrests, and in some cases, total impunity. Justice, when delivered, was often uneven. Some guards faced no consequences at all. Others reintegrated into society, changed their names, and lived long lives. Meanwhile, their victims carried trauma to their graves, many without ever seeing accountability. The memory of these women has also been fragmented. Holocaust education often focuses on major camps like Auschwitz, and male figures dominate the narrative. Majdanek and the women who ran it occupy a quieter corner of collective memory. Yet remembering them is essential, not out of vengeance, but truth. Their stories show us that brutality isn't bound by gender, and that justice must be blind not only to race or religion, but also to the face behind the crime. Their executions, or lack thereof, aren't just historical footnotes. They're moral questions that still echo today. Majdanek's female guards were not anomalies. They were ordinary women who became architects of terror. Elsa Ehrich's execution stands as a rare instance of justice in a sea of forgotten crimes. Most of her peers lived quietly after the war, unchallenged, unpunished, and unseen. Their story reminds us that evil often wears a familiar face, and that justice can be as selective as it is blind. As we reflect on their crimes and their fates, one question remains. If these women had been men, would more of them have swung from the gallows